Okay, guys, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time that you're watching this. Salutations. We're going to get started with chapter 40 on the circulatory system. So, as you guys know, I'm not going to be in class again until Monday, but I didn't want to waste a couple of days so that we could finish early in this summer semester. So, I want you guys to take a look at this video, watch it on your own time. If you have any questions, follow along in your book, pause it when you need to, come back with it. Email me questions. I will get back ASAP as soon as possible. And we're going to do the next two chapters that way, 40 and 41. Keep in mind, I want you guys to take notes as if we were still in class physically, because we're going to have an in-class quiz on Monday on components in chapter 40 and components in chapter 41. All right, so let's get started. All right, we're going to talk about an overview of the circulatory system, components of the blood, mammalian heart, and blood vessels. You guys know we always start with simple animals. We normally end up at mammals, and then we'll talk about blood flow and blood pressure regulation. All right. So, on a general overview of the circulatory systems, there are two kinds. There are two types of circulatory systems: closed, open. All right, closed system, open system. And we're going to start with closed because we're mammals and we are closed systems. So where do you find your blood in your body as a mammal? Do you find the blood just floating around in your body cavities, in your stomach, and your organs? Maybe you guys might say kind of, but tell me exactly where the blood is found. And you guys should have answered all of the blood in our bodies is found inside blood vessels, arteries, and veins for the most part. So closed circulatory systems are systems where all the blood is found inside the vessels. All right, we don't just have blood floating around in our stomach or in our different cavities inside our body. All the blood is confined within blood vessels. Now, for open systems, it's the opposite. Open systems, blood is mixed with interstitial fluid. And the reason why it's mixed with interstitial fluid is because it's not found in vessels. It's just floating around inside the body cavities. A good example of that are insects. You step on an insect and you hear that crunch from the exoskeleton, and then you see all the juices kind of ooze out, right? Those juices are found throughout the body of the insect. And what it is hemolymph. Hemolymph is blood plus interstitial fluid together, and they're mixed together because the blood isn't found only in blood vessels. The blood is found all throughout the cavity. So open system, closed system. Open is going to be hemolymph, and it's blood mixed with interstitial fluid. And then closed is going to be blood that's found in blood vessels. We're humans, we're closed. Insects are open, they have hemolymph. All right, and they use less energy for the insect way. Now, some animals are very simple. They lead a simple life. So if you have animals that have only one or two layers, right, they don't need this complex circulatory system. They can do all their work directly with the environment. So in terms of delivering nutrients or removing waste, they don't need a complicated circulatory system. So a good example would be sponges and jellyfish. So sponges and jellyfish would be a good example of a simple organism with one or two layers that doesn't need a complex system in terms of circulation. All right, moving on to what's inside the circulatory system, right? When we talk about circulatory system, we're talking about what main organs? We're talking about your heart, and we're talking about the blood that's floating around through your blood vessels. So what makes up blood? What makes up blood? As you guys should at least know, we did last chapter, we did red blood cells. We did red blood cells. That's one of the last things we ended up on your last chapter. So red blood cells, they're erythrocytes. Erythrocytes are the correct name in terms of the fancy name for them. And the whole point of red blood cells is to do what? Transfer gases. All right, transfer respiratory gases throughout your body. And that should be a review. You guys should be on that definition. Now, white blood cells. I know you guys probably heard of it before, but we haven't discussed it in this class. So white blood cells are called leukocytes. They're called leukocytes. And their primary job is to fight infections in the body. And we'll get to, I think, a slide coming up pretty soon talking about white blood cells. But we'll go through white blood cells extensively in the immune chapter. All right, now you have something called platelets. Platelets are thrombocytes. And if you get cut Why don't you bleed to death? Because eventually your blood clots and makes a plug to repair where your blood vessels became injured. And that's going to be caused by thrombocytes, aka platelets, and they help with clotting your blood to make sure you don't bleed out, and they repair the blood vessels. Vitamin K is really important for that process. And then you have the actual liquid portion of blood. The liquid portion is called plasma. So plasma is the liquid portion, and it's more than half of the blood is made up of this. So it's that liquid, the liquid when you think blood, you think it's flowing and running. That's the plasma. So you got red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and you have platelets, aka thrombocytes, leukocytes, erythrocytes, and plasma. So I expect you to know what each of those four components are and what they do. All right. So what is the complex that moves gases around in red blood cells? Another review question. You guys should be okay with this. This should be hemoglobin. Remember? So hemoglobin is what our red blood cells are using to transfer these gases around. And the base of hemoglobin is iron. All right, it's iron. The heme groups. Remember, we got two alpha and two beta subunits. So now we're talking about mollusks. So mollusks are clams, oysters, any bivalve. I feel like I'm missing an easy one. Mussels. So it's like the seafood that you eat that has the two valves and you open and shut. So mollusk, and there's some other ones too, like squids and octopus, but let's not get too deep. So mollusks use hemolymph, and if you have hemolymph, we're talking about open or close. Maybe when you hit pause, go back. I'll give you a second. All right, so if you have hemolymph, we're talking about open systems. We're talking about open systems where the blood is found throughout the body cavity and is not restricted only to blood vessels. So in those animals, instead of hemoglobin, it's hemocyanin. It's hemocyanin. And when you have hemocyanin, it's based in copper and not iron. But they do the same thing. They move respiratory gases throughout the body. And then you have earthworms. Earthworms also use iron, but this iron isn't formed in hemoglobin. It's formed in something called hemerythrin. All right, hemerythrin. Hemerythrin is for iron, but it's also in earthworms. Hemocyanin is based on copper, and it's in the hemolymph of mollusks. Hemoglobin, you guys should know about, is based on iron, and it's in mammals, and they transfer gases throughout the blood. So I expect you to know those three types of the carriers of the respiratory gases and what type of animals you found them in. Hemoglobin, hemocyanin, and hemerythrin. All right? Good. So we talked about these white blood cells earlier, okay? So white blood cells, aka leukocytes. For now, what I want you to know is you can subdivide them into granulocytes, which are first responders, and agranulocytes, which are adaptive immune response. And these two terms don't really make much sense right now, and that's okay. We'll spend a good portion of the immune chapter talking about these first responders and then the adaptive immune response. So for right now, understand that granulocytes is the first responders, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and then you have the agranulocytes, which are the monocytes and lymphocytes. And just know that, and that's good enough for your test. We'll get into what they do and how they function in the immune system when we get to that chapter. Okay. All right. So now we talked about platelets, right? Platelets are the little bits and pieces in your blood that help you to clot when your blood vessels become injured. So platelets are kind of shed from a larger structure called a megakaryocyte. So imagine a megakaryocyte being this huge conglomerate of just platelet cells, so to speak. And then what happens is these platelets kind of shed off from the main megakaryocyte. And when they shed off, they circulate throughout your blood. And whenever you become injured, they go to that site of injury and they clot, and then you form a scab, and then you stop bleeding. So I want you to know that platelets come from megakaryocytes. Megakaryocytes are basically the precursors of platelets, okay? And so you see here, you see this big megakaryocyte. and then you see the little platelets that fall off from the megakaryocyte. Then they go out to the blood, and then they find the injury in the vessel because they're already circulating throughout your blood, and they clot it, and you stop bleeding. All right. Now let's talk about blood type. Let's talk about blood type. Um, how blood type works is this. I'm sure some of you guys know your blood type, and I'm sure some of you guys don't know your blood type. I just found out my blood type like 3 weeks ago. I mean, it happens, I guess. But in any case, blood type basically works like this. It's the presence or absence of A and B antigens. Now, you guys don't know what antigens mean yet, so kind of just keep that word in mind for the immune chapter. So I'll keep this kind of as simple as possible. So the red blood cells are the red circle you see here. These red circles are red blood cells. If you have a red blood cell and it does not have A or B antigens, it doesn't have A or B antigens, and the A antigens will be these little blue arrows, and then the B antigens will be these little green circles. All right. You see here, O, it does not have A or B antigens. So that means it's O. O doesn't have any one. It doesn't have A or B antigens. Now, this is the reason why a person who has O blood can give their blood to anybody else. Because if, let's say you're A, if you put O blood inside your A blood as your recipient, your immune system doesn't recognize a threat because that O blood does not have A or B antigens. Now, antigens are something that elicit an immune response, and we'll talk about that later. So because O doesn't have any antigens, it doesn't elicit a response from anybody. So it's called a universal donor. All right, now let's look at AB. AB has the blue arrows and the green circles on it. All right, so that's the AB blood type. This blood type, for the red blood cells, they already have both antigens on it, right? They recognize both antigens. So if I give somebody, if you're an AB person and you take in O blood, it doesn't trigger a response because O blood doesn't have any antigens. If I give an AB person A blood, it doesn't trigger a response because the AB person already has A blood, has the A antigens on the red blood cells. And the same for B. B, if you give it to an AB person, they already have B antigens on the red blood cells, so it doesn't cause a response. So AB is kind of greedy. I'll say greedy. AB is like a selfish person. They can take blood from anybody else. All right, it doesn't matter what type of blood you have. If you're AB, you can take blood from any other person, and that's called the universal recipient. It's the universal recipient. So O is the universal donor. AB is the universal recipient. So A and B blood types are a little different, but I'm pretty sure you guys understand right about now. If it's A, if you are a A person and you have A antigens on your red blood cells, if I give you O blood, will you be okay? Yes, you will be okay. And the reason why is because O doesn't have any receptors, any antigens on it at all. If you're an A person and I give you A blood, will you be okay? Of course you'll be okay. It's the same blood type. If I give you B blood or AB blood, will you be okay? And the answer is no. Because if you're a person that has A antigens on your red blood cells, if somebody gives you B blood, your body does not recognize B receptors, B antigens, because that's not what you natively have. So when somebody puts B red blood cells into A blood, that's a problem because your immune system will attack those red blood cells that have that B antigen because your body doesn't recognize it. And the same with the A and the B. The A parts of that AB blood will be okay for an A person, but it's the B antigen that will elicit a response. All right. So that's how blood types work. It's because of these different antigens that only the O, A, B, or AB. And if you have any questions on that, just send me. We'll talk about it in class on Monday, and just send me an email if something I said didn't make sense. All right. So let's talk about mammalian, the heart and blood vessels. So of course, we're talking about us now, and there are 3 circuits that your blood circulates throughout your body. So take a look at this picture over here. And let's start with the systemic. The systemic circuit is basically all the blood that's going to your arms, your legs, your fingertips, your knees, your toes, your thighs, anything that's not in that, really, it's not in your heart or your lungs. It's going to be systemic. It's basically going out into your body. So the pulmonary circuit is any of the blood that's traveling, oh yeah, any of the blood that's traveling through your lungs. If it's traveling through your lungs, it means pulmonary. The word pulmonary is referring to your lungs. So the pulmonary circuit is only the blood that's flowing through your lungs and the alveoli. That's pulmonary circuit. Now, once it has the blood from the pulmonary circuit, it travels to your heart, and your heart pumps it out into the rest of your body, and then that's systemic. And that's really how it goes. Your blood goes throughout your body, and it loses all of its oxygen because it's giving the oxygen away. Your cells need it. And then it goes back into the pulmonary circuit to get pumped back into your blood, back into your heart, and your heart pumps the oxygenated blood back out. So you have blood travels throughout your body, it becomes deoxygenated, all right, because it's going throughout your body, it's going through your systemic circuit. Once it finishes your systemic circuit, it's out of oxygen. So now the heart pumps it into the pulmonary circuit, into your lungs. You breathe in, your alveoli gets the gas exchange happens, and then from there, the blood goes back to your heart. And then from there, your heart pumps it back into the systemic circuit. Goes to your body, you lose all the oxygen in your blood, and then your heart pumps it back into the lungs. The lungs give us oxygen. It goes back to the heart pumps it back out into the systemic circuit. It goes through the entire body. The systemic circuit gets rid of all the oxygen. Now it goes back into the heart pumps it into the pulmonary circuit of your lungs, and then you get more oxygen, heads back to your heart. The heart pumps to the systemic, and blah, 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 blah. It's a cycle. Now, so you really, it's the main two circuits you have in your circulatory system: pulmonary and systemic. Pulmonary, systemic, and your heart is the resting place, kind of in between these steps. There's a third one called coronary circuit. So if you guys ever seen the heart has these blood vessels on the surface of it. These blood vessels make sure your heart has enough oxygen. So I really don't get into like the whole direction, but the coronary circuit is kind of a separate thing that makes sure your heart has oxygen so your heart can keep pumping and being happy. And then the other two are the systemic and pulmonary, and then they just basically cycle depending on where you are on that roadmap in terms of oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. So understand pulmonary, understand the systemic, and understand coronary. So oxygenated blood leaves the lungs, goes to the heart. The heart pumps it out into the systemic. The systemic is where all the oxygen gets delivered to your cells, and then eventually the blood becomes depleted. And then in that case, the blood goes back to the heart. The heart pumps it into the pulmonary circuit to re-up on oxygen from the alveoli, and then that pumps it back out, goes to the heart, pumps it out to the systemic, and it keeps going. So if you have any questions on that, definitely email me, and we'll talk about that on Monday as well. So we're talking about heartbeats, all these heartbeats, right? Your heart is basically pumping its extreme pressure to get the blood throughout your body and throughout the systemic circuit. Now, whenever your heart muscle pumps, whenever it pumps, you call that contract. Boom, 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 boom. When you hear that contraction is called systole. That contraction is called systole. All right. So boom, contraction, systole. That's when they contract and blood leaves the heart. Blood leaves the heart from the ventricles. I'm not sure if I get that deep for your class with atriums and ventricles, but I'll look at it again, and then we'll talk about it on Monday. And if we do, I'll go back into the atriums and ventricles and left and right and things like that. But whenever the heart muscle relaxes, when it relaxes and opens up, it's called diastole. So you have systole and diastole. And whenever you relax, blood comes in. Whenever you pump, blood pumps out. So systole, blood leaves. Diastole, blood comes in. All right. Understand that two-part process. When the heart chamber, when one of the ventricles contracts, Systole, blood pumps out and it leaves, and then whenever the heart relaxes, diastole opens up, blood flows into the atrium. Oh, I thought there was something in here that you guys should see for a pacemaker. Maybe not. All right, cardiomyocytes. Cardiomyocytes are heart muscle cells. They're striated and they're very similar to the skeletal muscle cells, except for they contract involuntarily. And what that means is you can't, like you can flex your muscles, you can't flex your heart. You can't just make your heart beat exactly when you want it to. Now, of course, there's ways to increase or decrease your heart rate, but you can't just make it beat on command. Like, can't do that. That's not possible. It's involuntary. Oh, now we get to the ECG. So, you guys have seen the hospitals and you see it, right? That's the heartbeat. So we talked about electricity in the central nervous system. You also have this electricity in your heart, and so you have an electrical impulse from the sinoatrial node, and it basically is the signal for systole or diastole. Which one contracts? All right, systole. Think systole, stress. Systole, stress, contract, stress. So in any case, that's what you have when you see that peak is when your heart is beating. Now, what happens when it goes? What's that? It's you're dead, right? Because your heart's not beating anymore. So if you don't have that beat, you don't have that peak in terms of that chart. So you can measure this on the electrocardiogram. So you can measure it. That's the technical name for the equipment that you see with the heart rates, the peaks on it. So it's the electrocardiogram. As you can imagine, if the peaks are really close together, your heart is beating extremely fast. If the peaks have a lot of space in between them, your heart is beating more slowly. All right. So understand that sinoatrial node, that electrical impulse, and that's what happens when you see somebody say clear and they boom. When somebody's heart stops, you're trying to artificially give it that electrical shock to get the heart going again. All right, so arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood toward the heart. And this is not 100% true all the time because in the pulmonary circuit it's flipped, but we're not going to mention that for right now. Normally, especially in the systemic circuit, arteries carry blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood to the heart. So, which one do you think carries oxygenated blood? When I say oxygenated, I mean blood that's full of oxygen. So if the blood is full of oxygen, it's probably traveling away from the heart to all the cells in your body because the cells need oxygen. So normally arteries have oxygen. Now once all those cells used up all the oxygen from your blood and everything's been expended in your cells, now the blood is deoxygenated. So if you're deoxygenated, you want to travel back to the heart so your heart can pump you into the lungs to get more oxygen. So veins carry blood toward the heart and they normally don't have any more oxygen. Arteries carry blood away from the heart after they have been filled up with oxygen. So just keep that in mind. Except for pulmonary, it switches a little bit in there. Now let's talk about arteries and veins. We said that arteries carry blood away from the heart. So if you're carrying blood away from the heart, when you have that systole, you have that pump. When you have that pump, it's extreme pressure. It's extreme pressure. I know you guys heard like if your aorta gets punctured, the blood will squirt like 30 feet in a fountain. That's because your heart is pumping and it has this extreme pressure that's happening there. So because of that, arteries have really, really, really thick walls. So you look on the left side right here, you can see that the arteries have thick walls right here. You see wall 1, 2, 3, and then you have these things in the middle. Recognize the difference between an artery and a vein when you see it. I expect you to be able to look at these and say which one's which. On the right hand side, you see it's more skinny. You don't have these thick walls for the veins, right? Because at this point, the blood's already went throughout your body, and you don't have that pump from the system. Now, what you do see are these structures. You see these structures that you don't see in the arteries, and these are called these are valves. These are valves in your veins, and the reason they're there is most of the time when the blood is going to your heart, it's going against gravity. It's going against gravity because it's going from your legs back up to your heart, or if your arms are at your side, it's coming from your fingertips back up towards your heart. So you don't want blood to go the wrong way. That's a bad thing. If blood goes the wrong way, you have a couple of things that can happen with that. So these valves let blood go up or one way and not let it return back the way it came from. So I expect you to know the difference between arteries and veins, while arteries have thick walls, while veins have valves, and what they both look like. And here's a good picture of everything I just described. So let's get some definitions out the way. We have vasoconstriction, vasodilation, and we talked about valves and what they mean for your body in terms of the veins already. So vasoconstriction, ever heard of boa constrictor? Boa constrictor is this really big snake that squeezes things to death. So constriction means to squeeze. So vasoconstriction means your blood vessels become constricted. They get smaller. Now, vasodilation is the opposite. It's like somebody said, oh, I got my pupils dilated. I have to wear these shades because there's too much light coming in, right? Vasodilation is when you open, all right? So vasodilation is when the blood vessels open. Vasoconstriction is when the blood vessels get smaller, okay? Blood pressure. Blood pressure is the pressure of the blood in the arteries that helps push the blood through the body. You need a good blood pressure. Like I said, you have the systole happening where the blood is trying to get throughout your body in a systemic circuit. And the measure of this pressure is your blood pressure. So we talked about veins. Veins are moving things against gravity. And because of that, your muscles, your skeletal muscles help. They help kind of squeeze your veins, and they kind of keep them active to get the blood up to your heart. That's why, what happens when you sit down for a long time? When you sit down for too long, what happens to your legs or your butt or something? You say it gets dead, right? So what you're really feeling is you've been sitting inactive for so long that the blood is kind of not flowing like it should in your veins. And so you kind of get this little tingly, dead feeling. And then so what you can do is just get up and kind of shake around for a little bit. You'll shake your legs or just kind of flex, and those skeletal muscles will get the blood flowing properly again. And that also a list to it also helps in a process called varicose veins. If you guys ever seen varicose veins, it's it's just, well, let's see if we can find one. Ugh. Oh my goodness. All right, y'all see it, man. That's enough. So yeah, what you saw is the blood is not flowing properly. And the valves aren't catching it and keeping it going one way. So when it's kind of stuck and not moving, it becomes enlarged. And so you see the veins and you see the seam poking out, and it really shouldn't be like that. It's something that you really shouldn't have. And at this point, you should also know why arteries have thicker walls. I guess I meant to ask you that now, but I kind of gave you the answer a little while ago. So you can rewind it to find that answer. All right, so capillaries. So without getting too deep, capillaries are the intermediate between arteries and veins. So we said arteries go away from the heart and veins go towards the heart, right? Or however you want to look at it. So how does blood get from arteries to veins? Because they aren't connected. Arteries and veins are not connected. So you have this kind of middle road. You have, like, on the interstate, you got north and south, and you got the little pockets where the police be sitting at, and it's a emergency vehicles only, things like that. Imagine those little roads as the capillaries. And it's basically how you go from, let's say, northbound, you can cut across, and now you're going southbound, or vice versa. Either way, those little intermediates are the connection between the blood and the arteries and the blood and the veins. And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's good. We're talking about arterioles and venules. We're not going to get that deep into it. But understand that the capillaries connect the arteries with the veins. They're kind of like this little midway passage between both of them. And the hydrostatic pressure of blood against the vessel walls is blood pressure. Of course, the pressure is different when your heart pumps and then when your heart releases. So, you guys, do you have blood pressure? And you have the systole over diastole. The larger number should be when it's pumping. The small number is when it's released and it's diastole. And so 120, and we're talking about 120 over 80. I think that's like a common healthy blood pressure. And so you don't want it too high. You don't want that number too high in terms of the pressure, of course, because that's a bad thing for your body and it could lead to increases in cardiovascular diseases. So understand how that blood pressure is monitored. 120 over 80. The 120, the higher number is when the systole, when the contraction happens, when it's stress, and then the small number is diastole when it's released. So, all right, guys, I think that's it. That's it for this chapter, chapter 40. I'll put chapter 41 up as well. And if you have any questions, just send me an email. And it's kind of my first time doing this, so let's see how it goes. And we'll have a quiz on Monday on some of the things you found in this chapter and in chapter 41. And then we'll reconvene and then we'll make a new plan moving forward for next week, which is, I think it's the last week in terms of our physical chapters. All right. Be safe. Have a good weekend. All right. Bye.